There are moments in global politics when the tremors begin quietly through procurement decisions, diplomatic exclusions, canceled summits, and statements that appear technical on the surface but carry the force of historic rupture underneath. Then there are moments when those tremors become impossible to ignore, when scattered signals begin aligning into a single unmistakable pattern, and what once looked like isolated disagreements begins to resemble something much larger, a geopolitical shift. In recent months, a growing chorus of events has raised a question once considered almost unthinkable in modern strategic affairs. What happens when America's allies begin preparing for a world in which the United States is no longer the dependable center of the alliance system it built? That question sits at the heart of a mounting international drama shaped by confrontation, distrust, and the rising sense among many world leaders that the old assumptions governing Western security can no longer be taken for granted. Across Europe, in North America, and through financial capitals far beyond Washington, signs of strategic recalibration have begun emerging not as abstract theory, but through concrete moves carrying real military, economic, and diplomatic consequences. Defense contracts are being reconsidered. Procurement, once thought automatic, is being reopened. Political rhetoric has hardened into strategic hedging. And in the middle of it all, Donald Trump has once again become the polarizing force around which much of this turbulence appears to orbit. What makes this moment so striking is not merely the criticism directed at Trump by foreign leaders. Sharp criticism has surfaced before, but rather the growing suggestion that some governments are beginning to respond, not simply with words, but with structural decisions. Decisions about weapons systems, about alliances, about industrial independence, about whether reliance on Washington has become a strategic vulnerability rather than a guarantee of security. For decades, NATO represented the central pillar of the transatlantic order, built on interoperability, mutual defense, and above all, trust. That trust was never solely about treaties or military budgets. It rested on something less visible but even more important, the belief that the alliance itself was politically durable, that disagreements among members would never fundamentally outweigh their shared commitment to collective defense. But when doubts emerge about that commitment, especially doubts surrounding Article 5 itself, the foundation begins to shift. It is against this backdrop that one of the most symbolically significant developments has captured growing attention. NATO's move away from long-standing American airborne surveillance systems in favor of European alternatives is about far more than aircraft. On paper, it is procurement. In strategic meaning, it may be something much larger, a message. For nearly 4 decades, American-made airborne warning systems were not merely tools of surveillance. They symbolized U.S. technological dominance within the alliance, tangible proof that American military power remained deeply embedded in NATO's operational core. Their replacement by a European platform sends a signal extending beyond defense acquisition. It suggests that Europe's long-discussed pursuit of strategic autonomy may no longer be rhetorical aspiration, but evolving doctrine. And that shift has unfolded amid extraordinary political tension. Trump's attacks on NATO, burden sharing, his recurring challenges to alliance norms, and broader uncertainty surrounding America's commitments have fueled a debate European capitals once approached cautiously, but now discuss with growing urgency. If Washington itself introduces unpredictability into the alliance equation, many ask, should Europe continue structuring its security future around assumptions of automatic American leadership? That question has echoed far beyond Brussels. In Canada, similar anxieties have surfaced through debate over advanced fighter procurement, where what might once have been treated as a straightforward military modernization decision has taken on broader geopolitical meaning. The discussion has become about more than aircraft capability. It has become about sovereignty, dependence, industrial control, and the risks of relying too heavily on a supplier whose politics may shift faster than defense planning cycles. This is how major geopolitical transformations often begin, not with dramatic declarations that a new order has arrived, but through 1,000 practical decisions quietly anticipating one. And perhaps nowhere is that anticipation more visible than in Europe's changing tone. Statements from European leaders in recent months have carried a remarkable frankness, at times bordering on historic in implication. Where concerns about American reliability were once framed delicately, often in diplomatic language designed not to provoke, some leaders now speak more openly of uncertainty, more openly of European responsibility, more openly of a future in which strategic dependence on Washington may have to give way to strategic resilience at home. This emerging language matters because rhetoric among allies often precedes policy. First comes caution, then public signaling, then institutional change. Some analysts have described this as Europe preparing for contingency. Others see something deeper, the early architecture of a more autonomous power center. Either way, the symbolism is hard to ignore. For years, critics warned that repeated assaults on alliance cohesion could generate unintended consequences. Few imagined those consequences might include allied states actively diversifying away from U.S. defense systems, coordinating independently in crisis diplomacy, and discussing strategic self-sufficiency not as aspiration but necessity. And yet this is precisely the pattern many now perceive. The repercussions stretch beyond military affairs. Financial signals have added another layer to the story. In markets where confidence often moves ahead of politics, concerns about instability can manifest subtly before becoming visible in policy circles. Capital hesitates before governments announce repositioning. Investors reassess before diplomats speak publicly. When sovereign funds reconsider commitments, when foreign buyers scrutinize exposure, when the perception of American political volatility begins entering risk calculations, these are not isolated financial footnotes. They are part of the same broader climate of reassessment. And this is where the narrative takes on its most consequential dimension, because the issue is no longer solely whether Trump has alienated allies. It is whether those allies have begun adapting to a future shaped by that alienation. That distinction changes everything. Alienation can be temporary. Adaptation implies something more enduring. This is why each development, whether a defense procurement decision, a canceled investment commitment, or a high-level summit excluding Washington, has drawn disproportionate scrutiny. Each can be interpreted as a standalone event. Taken together, they begin to resemble a pattern, and patterns in geopolitics often matter more than headlines. The historical irony is difficult to miss. For generations, American strategy urged allies to contribute more, build capacity, and reduce overdependence. Yet when some now appear to be doing precisely that, though, partly in response to distrust of Washington itself, the result looks less like burden-sharing success and more like strategic fragmentation. Some in Europe view this as overdue emancipation. Others see dangerous drift. Still, others fear both may be true at once, because the deeper concern haunting policymakers is not simply whether Europe can become more autonomous. It is whether a stronger European pillar can emerge without weakening the alliance it was meant to reinforce. That question has become central because beneath procurement shifts and diplomatic disputes lies something even more profound, a struggle over whether the Western alliance system can survive prolonged political uncertainty at its center. And that uncertainty has increasingly become personalized around Trump. In much of the political storytelling surrounding this crisis, Trump is framed not merely as participant but catalyst, the force accelerating fractures already latent within the system. Whether one agrees with that framing or not, it drives much of the narrative now resonating across political commentary and international media. His critics argue his confrontational approach has transformed leverage into estrangement. Supporters counter he is forcing overdue reckoning among allies long dependent on U.S. protection. But beyond those competing interpretations lies a simpler geopolitical fact. Allies appear to be adjusting, and adjustment, once institutionalized, can outlast the politics that produced it. That may be the most consequential part of this story, because even if personalities change, procurement chains endure. Defense industrial partnerships endure. Strategic doctrines endure. New habits of cooperation endure. History is filled with moments when tactical disputes triggered structural transformation no one initially intended. The Suez Crisis, the oil shocks, the end of Bretton Woods, each began amid immediate conflict. Each reshaped larger systems. Some analysts now wonder whether current transatlantic tensions could become remembered in similar terms, not as collapse of alliance, but as beginning of a different alliance altogether. Meanwhile, the symbolism of exclusion has carried unusual political weight. Reports of major diplomatic consultations proceeding without meaningful U.S. participation have fueled perceptions that parallel architectures may be emerging. Even where such meetings remain ad hoc rather than institutional, optics matter. In diplomacy, absence can speak as loudly as attendance. And in an age shaped as much by political symbolism as policy substance, symbolism can drive reality. That is partly why the phrase America first means America alone, once rhetorical provocation, has gained renewed traction among critics. It condenses an enormous strategic argument into a devastating political frame. Whether fair or exaggerated, it resonates because it captures a fear underlying much of this debate, that pressure intended to discipline allies may instead be pushing them away. That possibility carries implications extending far beyond any single administration, because if allied trust erodes deeply enough, rebuilding it may take far longer than breaking it did. And trust, unlike weapons systems or trade flows, cannot simply be procured back. It must be restored. That may prove especially difficult in a world already marked by intensifying competition, war shocks, energy insecurity, and rising multipolar ambitions. Under such conditions, uncertainty inside alliances does not remain contained. It becomes opportunity for rivals. This is why some strategists view the stakes of this moment as larger than Trump, larger than NATO procurement fights, larger even than transatlantic politics. They see a test of whether Western cohesion can survive populist disruption and geopolitical strain simultaneously. That is no small question, because much of post-war stability has rested on the answer being yes. Yet increasingly, some are no longer certain. And uncertainty in geopolitics rarely stays theoretical for long. It hardens into planning, then budgets, then institutions, then history. Already signs of this hardening are visible. European defense industrial ambitions are growing. Calls for autonomy no longer sound fringe. Discussions once confined to think tanks have entered leadership speeches, and each new controversy appears to accelerate momentum. Critics of alarmist narratives caution against overstating the rupture. They note alliances have survived severe internal strains before. They point to enduring military integration, shared threat perceptions, and the vast practical interdependence that still binds Europe and America. Those points matter. they may well prove decisive. But even if one rejects the most dramatic collapse scenarios, the evidence of recalibration remains difficult to dismiss. And recalibration itself can reshape history because all